part of perhaps the grief cycle or before the grief cycle is definitely a stage of burnout. And again, I would say that it looks different for different people. Some people mask it, but you can tell because they're doing extreme behaviours. And others, it just feels like their energy dial is getting lower and lower over time. It's harder to turn up to work. It's harder to go to sleep. It's harder to enjoy things. It's harder to express yourself in relationships. It's harder to give and receive. You know, these are all things where people are just starting to become less present, less energetic, less happy. And I mean, I've seen some people burn out and it's a physical thing. You know, they're constantly getting colds or skin rashes, or, you know, their immune system's telling them that they're under fire for a long period of time and they need to go back and recharge. Others I have seen definitely start drinking more. So really it's about knowing your own signs, and then and being self-aware. And when you see that, go, stop, okay, I can see that's happening. What's perhaps triggering it, or what do I need to do to get back my energy levels?
I think another sign of burnout is when you start to kind of lose that buffer and lose that resilience, and you know, if you get pushed back by something, you sort of lose the ability to bounce back from that. I think that's a pretty good indicator of burnout too. You know, if something pushes you over, you might stay down. That's also burnout.
I have seen burnout in volunteers, particularly ones who have responsibility. So Friends of Parks, for instance, and some of our Bush for Life volunteers would experience this as well, and I'm sure other groups would have other groups who fit into that category, you know, where they're feeling ultimately responsible and a great sense of ownership. It's not just a task-based volunteer thing. I know that people who have an unsuccessful tree growing year, for instance, it can be terrible on them, like truly terrible. They can feel deeply ashamed, and if they have a couple of those, they will express emotions very similar to burnout, because people want to do the right thing.
It's really hard to prevent stress and burnout in the environment movement. People, especially now, are feeling like an increased sense of urgency with a lot of the issues, particularly climate change, for example. People are often working around the clock, getting phone calls at all, working in quite difficult conditions on a number of levels, and just keep on going because they want to win.
I think the environment movement is generally, potentially at least, a stressful area to work in as a volunteer or as a paid person, because there's so much to be done and the resources usually aren't enough to get everything done that we think should be done. So it's very easy to feel overwhelmed by that, but it's important to surround yourself with positive people who've got a like mind. I think that's really the nucleus for any sort of system where you're going to remain positive and keep good energy.
To look after yourself and avoid burnout, I think it's really important to delegate, and it also is really good for your group dynamics, for people to feel responsibility for a certain aspect themselves. And I think groups will achieve the most and probably have the most satisfaction if everyone feels like they're important, rather than one person trying to take on too much or do too much.
It's up to individuals and the people they're working with to check in on each other and make sure, hang on, have you had a break? When was the last time you had a couple of days off? You need to go. And looking after yourself, but also making sure that other people are doing that. So if there's a bit of that, it creates a culture of people going, I'm having a couple of days off, it's going to be better for the campaign in the long run, and it's better for me right now and into the future. And creating that culture of self-care is not only okay, it's necessary.
Especially in the environment sector, self-care is really important because a lot of the work that we're doing takes a long time, and it can often be an uphill battle. So taking time to take a step back and look after yourself so that you can kind of sustain that passion and that energy over a long period is really, really valuable.
When you decide to be a change maker, you have created a situation where you're going to make elevated expectations for yourself. And sometimes you're going to meet those elevated expectations. Sometimes you won't. And if when you don't meet those elevated expectations, be compassionate to yourself. Say it's okay. You can do it again later. Or maybe there's a reason why it didn't happen. I need the time for myself is gardening, exercise, and eating well. If I don't choose to exercise or eat well, I'll sacrifice my health. Sacrifice my health means I can't do the things that I want to do, or I'll create further problems. Exercise is also my meditation. I'm not good at sitting still. I'm one of those people. So exercise allows me to be present.
I mean, I think what works for me is having, I couldn't live without my music and my poetry, and I like to do meditation and yoga, and I think everyone needs a practice. I don't actually think it matters what that is, but a daily practice is really useful to remind you that you're the most important person, and you need to look after yourself to keep going, because if you want to keep doing this work, you need to be doing it.
Yeah, I think so. For me, it's about staying connected with people that aren't always in the environment sector. So I've got friends from high school that work in more humanitarian kind of issues, and I've got friends, you know, from my 8 years in hospitality that I can connect with, and they've all got their own kind of things that they're working on and working towards, and they're not all related to the environment. Some of them are, but some of them aren't. So it's nice to kind of connect back with them and know that we're all kind of working on our own things, but to be reminded that there's other stuff out there, and it helps kind of get my head out of the environment space from time to time, which I think is really important.
I think there's some things that we really need to do to take responsibility to make sure that we can sustain our own journey in this work. Part of that is remembering where we fell in love and how that felt, and making time to recharge and remind ourselves of that. You know, that sense of freedom and wonder, it's still there. We can have our holidays terribly affected by saying, oh, I can't go there, the weeds just, you know, actually we need to let go of that. We really do. It's really important that we spend time in nature, just enjoying the wonder, the curiosity, the creativity, the freedom, whatever it is for you that really resonates, and just enjoying that place, and that place that you've committed so much of your adult and childhood life to. And it is wonderful still. It is still splendiferous.
Sleep. You know, if I could underline any self-care strategy, it would be sleep. Good, restful sleep.
I'm really lucky, you know, I grow a lot of food, and I used to sell all the best stuff and just eat what was left at the end of the market. Now I have a tendency to go, oh, that's really nice, and I'll put that off to the side for myself. You know, for me, it's really important to take a nice piece of the work that I put in. So, you know, for me, that's quite easy.
Like, there's not going to ever be one go-to person to solve everything. So support network is a network, it's not just one person. So I'll have someone I'll speak to about maybe policy, I'll talk to someone else about people management, or talk to someone else about various things. So I have different things. And it's good to talk to people that are doing similar things that you're doing, maybe in a different campaign, maybe in a different, and sharing notes, comparing experience, and pretty much everything, every single time comes down to communication. Sometimes that has to be extracted from people, sometimes it's forthcoming, but as long as communication happens, generally things turn out okay.
This year there are lots of things I wanted to do in this space, and I kind of sat down and sketched them out on a little bit of paper to kind of get my head around what was achievable and what would flow from one thing to the next. And then I kind of sat down with my husband to look at them and to talk to him about it, just to let him know that this is what was important to me and what I was hoping to pursue this year. And I guess to get his support in a way that he would understand that this is something important to me, something I'm planning on putting a fair bit of time into, and that I would need his support as well.
Creating spaces for healing and for dealing with the grief that a lot of people bear around how they see the environment being treated and how we're continuing to treat the environment. So again, it's one of those spaces that I think as the environment movement we need to hold that space for people as well, and there's a few groups that are endeavouring to do that as well. So I think it's a similar kind of understanding in terms of acknowledging our past in Australia. It's like we've got to actually understand and acknowledge the grief that lies there before we can move forward, and we've got it, and that's a messy, crazy space, but I think we need to start doing that.
In thinking about our own sustainability as a sector, it's really important to think about the impact of grief. There's been some fantastic stuff published by Richard Hobbs, who's a Western Australian academic in restoration ecology, and he's been a very technical person, but he has recently been really thinking about this idea of grief and how it's impacting us and our ability as a sector, as a community, to make good decisions and to be as effective as we can be. And I have also definitely experienced grief, and most of the colleagues around me have experienced that. And some of that grief can be really obvious. It can be. So I remember one classic example of this was this is with the Fleurieu Peninsula swamps and the Mount Lofty Ranges emu wren, and we had spoken to a landholder about the emu wrens in their swamp and how important this site was. And a couple of months later, that cleared absolutely every inch of it to the ground, like burnt it. They cleared it, burnt it. And we were just so in shock by that. And we just felt enormous grief, and we felt responsible. And it really affected us as people. Like, you lost sleep. You thought, well, do I give this up? It really made you challenge your sense of self, etc. So that's a really clear example. But then there's lots of more subtle examples. And just hearing yourself being called do-gooders and blockers of, South Australian progress on a daily basis can add to this too. So there's a lot of grief we're dealing with. And when you experience grief, it's meant to be a temporary state. It's not meant to be an ongoing state for people. And when you do experience grief, you're not your full self. You're in a state of shock. Things shut down in you, and there's quite a lot of brain research which, it's a bit like the fight and flight. You won't expect your higher level thinking to come to the fore. You won't expect your higher level creativity or problem solving or communication skills to be there. And yet these are the very skills that we need in droves in the sector. There's a term called psychological numbing. When you just get a barrage of bad news and stuff that's painful to you on an ongoing basis, you kind of have to turn down the volume in order to be able to keep going. And I think a lot of people have got their volume down on 3, which is very understandable because they have to keep functioning. But in terms of getting the best out of us, it's not ideal. So I'd really encourage people to just think about grief, because even just acknowledging it and expressing it and thinking how it might be a part of your life and is really helpful in terms of moving on. As it is when you lose a loved one, it's very similar. And know that it may look different in different people, it may come up at different times, and it has a place, but ultimately you want to continue to build yourself back to your fuller self, and to do that you may need to take a range of strategies, and I would encourage people to do that.
I think if you're feeling a sense of grief about the environment, it's important to find people around who will support you. So I think that comes from being open and honest about support you might need or things you might be feeling, and letting people in. So if you put a call out for support and someone puts a hand up maybe to help you, that you should let them in. I think as soon as there's people around you that can hear you out and share the load and share the grief, then you're in a better place to cope with it.
Our group operates a bit differently than some others in some respects. One of them is that we're not too hard on each other about getting things done. If people have personal pressures or work pressures or various other reasons, might be health reasons or whatever, that mean that they're unable to deliver on something they've been working on, or work equally with somebody else that they were partnering with, or whatever, we don't tend to take them to task for that. We're very understanding of people's situations. Now, that means that we then need to work out what to do in those situations. If something that is due by a certain date and it's not going to happen, we will then look at it. Can somebody else help out instead? Do we decide that we're not going to deliver it at all? Do we modify what we can deliver? Do we talk to people about changing the expectations? Those sorts of things. I think that's really helped keep the group really solid, and also it's a caring attitude for each other, and that keeps the group strong as well.
It's important that people check in with each other, that people communicate. If someone's a bit flat, give them a call, check in on them, go out for a coffee and have a chat. If someone is not quite right towards someone in a meeting, check in. Someone should check in on that person afterwards, and just making sure that everyone's okay. If someone's behaving badly towards someone, other people will call them out on that behaviour, and that way everyone there knows that that kind of bad behaviour is not accepted, and it sets an example for everyone else that, one, not to behave like that, and two, that if someone does treat you badly, you are going to be protected by all these people that you're working with. So if people feel that other people have got their back, they're more likely to take whatever's thrown at them by external forces when you're working a good team that you know you're supported by.
Okay, one of the best things that I was ever told about supporting one another was actually here in this building at the joinery. Craig Wilkins said what he wanted to do with this whole setup was to offer a space where people can come together, and if they were getting close to burnout, or if they were finding it really difficult, they could know that if they stepped back, there was still a momentum, and so you could step back, take time for yourself, regenerate, and come back in. So I guess that, having a community around you that allows you to step out and step back in